Recently, you launched a campaign to hold Hillary Clinton accountable for her crimes. How are you going to accomplish that?
We're all for it. I think an indictment would be a good idea, followed by a prison sentence.
Thank you for appearing, Secretary Clinton, and I'm glad to see your health is improving. One of the things that disappointed me most about the original 9/11 was no one was fired. We spent trillions of dollars, but there were a lot of human errors. These are judgment errors, and the people who make judgment errors need to be replaced, fired, and no longer in a position of making these judgment calls. So we have a review board. The review board finds 64 different things that we can change. A lot of them are common sense and should be done, but the question is, it's a failure of leadership that they weren't done in advance, and 4 lives were cost because of this. I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11, and I really mean that. Had I been president at the time, and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable. The thing is that, we can understand that you're not reading every cable. I can understand that maybe you're not aware of the cable from the ambassador in Vienna that asked for $100,000 for an electrical charging station. I can understand that maybe you're not aware that your department spent $100,000 on 3 comedians who went to India on a promotional tour called Make Chi Not War. But I think you might be able to understand and might be aware of the $80 million spent on a consulate in Mashar al-Sharif that will never be built. I think it's inexcusable that you did not know about this and that you did not read these cables. I would think by anybody's estimation, Libya has to have been one of the hottest of hot spots around the world. Not to know of the request for securities really, I think, cost these people their lives. Their lives could have been saved had someone been more available, had someone been aware of these things, more on top of the job. And the thing is I don't suspect you of bad motives. The review board said, well, these people weren't willfully negligent. I don't think you were willfully. I don't suspect your motives of wanting to serve your country, but it was a failure of leadership not to be involved. It was a failure of leadership not to know these things. And so I think it is good that you're accepting responsibility because no one else is. And there is a certain amount of culpability to the worst tragedy since 9/11, and I'm glad you're accepting this. Now, my question is the U.S. involved with any procuring of weapons, transfer of weapons, buying, selling, anyhow transferring weapons to Turkey out of Libya?
To Turkey? I will have to take that question for the record. Nobody's ever raised that with me.
It's been in news reports that ships have been leaving from Libya and that they may have weapons. And what I'd like to know is the annex that was close by, were they involved with procuring, buying, selling, obtaining weapons? And were any of these weapons being transferred to other countries, any countries, Turkey included?
Well, Senator, you'll have to direct that question to the agency that ran the annex. And I will see what information is available. And
you're saying you don't know?
I do not know. I don't have any information on that. And, with respect to personnel, Senator, first, that's why we have independent people who review the situation as we did with the Pickering and Mullen ARB. And all 4 individuals identified in the ARB have been removed from their job. Secondly, they've been placed on administrative leave while we step through the personnel process to determine the next steps. Third, both Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen specifically highlighted the reason why this is complicated because under federal statute and regulations, unsatisfactory leadership is not grounds for finding a breach of duty. The ARB did not find these 4 individuals breached their duty. So I have submitted legislation to this committee, to the Congress, to fix this problem so future ARBs will not face the situation.
But here's the problem. The review board has all these recommendations, but there's one thing they failed to address, and I think you failed to address, and it sets us up for another tragedy like this. They should have never been sent in there without a military guard. This should have been an embassy like in Baghdad in a war zone, and it should have been under military guard, significant military guard, Defense Department command. I don't think the State Department's capable of being in the war zone and protecting these people. I still don't think that. I think another tragedy could happen. I think another tragedy could happen in another war zone around the world. I think someone needs to make an executive decision. Someone needs to take leadership, and with that leadership should be that you shouldn't send them in with no Marines. You shouldn't send them in with Marines that are to guard records, not people. You shouldn't send them in with the same kind of ambassador or embassy staff that you have in Paris. I think that's inexcusable.
Well, Senator, the reason I'm here today is to answer questions the best I can. I am the Secretary of State. And the ARB made very clear that the level of responsibility for the failures that they outlined was set at the Assistant Secretary level and below. The administration has sent officials to the Hill more than 30 times. We've given as much information. We've been as transparent as we can. Obviously, we will continue to brief you and others to answer any and all questions that you have about going forward. The reason we put into effect an accountability review board is to take it out of the heat of politics and partisanship and accusations and to put it in the hands of people who have no stake in the outcome. The reason I said make it open, tell the world, is because I believe in transparency. I believe in taking responsibility. And I have done so, and I hope that we're going to be able to see a good working relationship between the State Department and the committee going forward.
Watch how Senator Rand Paul absolutely unloads on Hillary Clinton in this Senate hearing. If there was ever a hearing that captured the growing anger Americans had toward Washington elites, this was it. What you just watched wasn't some polite policy disagreement. That was Senator Rand Paul directly confronting Hillary Clinton over one of the biggest foreign policy disasters of the Obama era, and he came at her with the kind of aggression voters were desperate to see at the time. What made this exchange so explosive wasn't just Benghazi itself. It was the frustration behind it. Americans had already spent years hearing politicians promise accountability after failure in Washington, and yet nobody ever seemed to face consequences. Rand Paul opens by bringing up 9/11 and the fact that, despite massive intelligence failures and endless taxpayer spending, almost nobody at the top truly paid a price. That's the context here. He's basically saying the same culture of incompetence and protectionism existed again during Benghazi, and notice how direct he gets. He doesn't dance around it. He tells Hillary Clinton that if he were president, he would have fired her. That is not normal Senate hearing language. Most politicians soften criticism with vague talking points, but Rand Paul wanted maximum impact. He wanted Americans watching at home to see somebody finally say what millions were already thinking. How could one of the most dangerous diplomatic posts in the world not have adequate security? That's the core issue that haunted Clinton politically for years. Libya in 2012 was chaos. The country was collapsing after the fall of Gaddafi. Militias were everywhere. Terrorist groups were growing stronger. The Obama administration had publicly celebrated Libya as a success story after NATO intervention, but reality on the ground was spiraling out of control. And then Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans ended up dead. Rand Paul hammers Clinton on something that emotionally connected with a lot of viewers, the idea that warnings were ignored. He keeps repeating variations of the same accusation. How do you not know? How do you not read the cables? How do you not understand that Benghazi was one of the hottest hotspots in the world? That argument was politically devastating because it framed the issue less as evil intent and more as arrogant detachment from reality. And honestly, that's what made this hearing resonate beyond partisan politics. Even people who weren't hardcore conservatives looked at Washington and saw leaders insulated from consequences. Regular Americans lose their jobs over mistakes all the time. But in D.C., catastrophic failures somehow become process discussions and bureaucratic reviews. Rand Paul tapped directly into that resentment. Now, Democrats and Clinton allies argued that she was being scapegoated for a broader intelligence and security breakdown. They pointed to the Accountability Review Board, staffing complications, federal employment protections, and the fact that diplomatic security involves multiple agencies. Clinton herself tried to stress that officials had been removed and reforms were being considered. But politically, Those answers sounded procedural, while Rand Paul sounded emotional and furious. And in politics, emotion usually wins. What's also fascinating looking back now is how this hearing foreshadowed the populist wave that exploded in American politics a few years later. The distrust of institutions, the anger toward career political figures, the belief that elites protect each other while ordinary Americans pay the price. You can almost see the groundwork being laid for the political environment that eventually helped propel Donald Trump into the White House. Rand Paul was channeling that anti-establishment energy before it fully consumed American politics. He wasn't just criticizing Hillary Clinton personally. He was attacking the entire culture of bureaucratic immunity in Washington. That's why lines like, "someone should have been fired," hit so hard. To voters, it sounded like basic common sense. And then the hearing takes another turn when Paul starts questioning possible weapons transfers connected to Libya and Turkey. Clinton says she doesn't know and pushes him toward the intelligence agencies. But again, politically, that answer fed the larger perception problem. Every "I don't know" became fuel for people who already believed the administration either wasn't in control or wasn't being transparent. The other major point Rand Paul makes is about military protection. He argues these diplomats should never have been operating in an environment like Benghazi without major military security. And honestly, that criticism carried weight because Americans were watching footage and hearing testimony that made Benghazi sound less like a normal diplomatic posting and more like an active war zone. His comparison to Baghdad was deliberate. He's basically saying, if you know you're sending Americans into extreme danger, why would you protect them with peacetime standards? Why were Marines seemingly limited? Why wasn't there overwhelming force protecting U.S. personnel? Those are emotionally powerful arguments because they revolve around a simple expectation Americans have. If the government sends people into danger, the government has a duty to protect them. And remember, this hearing became part of a much larger political war over Hillary Clinton's image heading into the 2016 election cycle. Benghazi became symbolic. To Republicans, it represented incompetence, elitism, and a refusal to take responsibility. To Democrats, it became an example of relentless partisan attacks designed to damage Clinton politically. But regardless of where people stood politically, this hearing absolutely shaped public perception. You can also see why Rand Paul's style stood out. He wasn't giving a polished consultant-approved speech. He sounded angry, personal, frustrated, and whether people agreed with him or not, that authenticity mattered. Voters increasingly reward politicians who sound like they genuinely believe what they're saying instead of reading carefully engineered talking points. Years later, Benghazi is still one of those political flashpoints people argue about because it touches bigger questions Americans still wrestle with today. Can government institutions be trusted? Do powerful officials ever face accountability? Are bureaucracies too bloated and detached to respond to real-world threats? Those questions didn't disappear after this hearing. If anything, they became even more central to American politics. And what really stands out watching this exchange today is just how much tension there was underneath the surface. This wasn't just about 4 Americans killed overseas. It was about collapsing trust between the public and political leadership. Rand Paul understood that, and he weaponized it masterfully in this hearing. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was Rand Paul right to go this hard against Hillary Clinton, or did this hearing become more about politics than facts? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.